Hey everybody, QG here. Disney is certainly one of the companies that has stuck around for such a long time that just about anyone would know it, from their films to the songs, but in today's case, the characters especially. Disney has never really had their own fighting game, like anything proper of sorts, and so I think it would be really neat to follow in a lot of other people's footsteps and give my take on a Disney fighting game roster. I'm going to stick to the same general rules as I tried to keep last time, which is that I limit my roster sizes to 24 characters, because lower than that, and I really limit myself, higher than that, and there's not much challenge. And then in regards to Disney specifically, I'm going to avoid using like as many non-true Disney characters as possible. So there's no Pixar on this list. There's no Marvel. There's no Star Wars. There's no Indiana Jones. There's no Avatar. There's none of that. And the reason is because I'll probably just make my own roster videos of those at some point. But also, I wanted to focus on Disney specifically instead of trying to cram 6 different companies into one thing and calling that Disney, because that just doesn't feel right. And I did basically avoid using any Disney Channel characters, with potentially one exception, but we'll get to that when we get to it. For now, though, let's get into the starting roster, which will be the first 12 characters. Pete is actually the first character I'm adding, and not Mickey, and there's a very simple reason for this. Pete is actually the first Disney character. Yes, you often hear that it's Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, but Pete as a character existed about 2 years before Oswald ever did. Granted, he was a different kind of animal and he wasn't named Pete back then, but it is still confirmed that he existed before Oswald, and so he is the truly first Disney character that's at least still around today. So, for Pete specifically, I envision him as an all-rounder heavyweight character. He'd hit hard, live long, and be surprisingly fast speed-wise. He can spit nails that close gaps and deal considerable damage to opponents, and his attacks would have a lot of end lag to compensate for his strengths. So, I mean, what you'd expect out of a heavyweight that can sort of do it all, but not excel at anything in particular at the same time. Now we get to Mickey. I don't need to explain why he's here. It's Mickey. Obviously, Mickey was going to be in the Disney fighting game roster. The question is how he's going to play, and the archetype I have in mind for him is actually a bait and punish trapper. This is the other reason why I didn't lead with Mickey, because Pete was the more basic beginner character compared to Mickey. So, the idea with Mickey is that he'd use the Sorcerer's Apprentice hat to dish out surprising damage, but has to be calculated due to slower frame data from these attacks. He'd also summon out brooms to dish out damage independently and trap the opponent, probably be setting in place across the stage, maybe 1 or 2 of them or something like that. And his special moves would be centered around Mousecatools for a wide array of different attacks, such as springy shoes or a big claw. Or just, you could really go all out with Mousecatools mapped to his specials. Yeah, I wanted to just go a little more out there with Mickey, rather than just like, oh, it's Epic Mickey, give him the paintbrush. Like, that's been done before. Everyone does that. So, it's not being different for the sake of being different. It's, I wanted to come up with something unique. Scrooge McDuck is the next character. Definitely a very iconic one at that. Probably more synonymous with Disney Channel, but, you know, it's not exactly where he got his start. And generally speaking, Scrooge is just, you know, he's a very popular character. His archetype, I envision him would be a mid-range swordy. which means he would use his cane for a lot of attacks, especially via bouncing off of opponents. So whether that's from the top, from the bottom, from the sides, I envision that he would be able to dish out damage to opponents, and every time he hits him, he like would end up being further away or something like that to ensure that he's out of harm's way. I think it would also be cool if he utilized wads of cash or coin bags as like projectiles, so that he's still got something he can use really long range. I'd prefer his weakness to be like characters that get in close really quickly, that just kind of overwhelm him. Maybe even an attack involving like bagpipes, because I remember that from like the Christmas movie. Maybe he uses that as like a get off me move or something. Stitch is probably one of my favorite Disney characters ever. I've yet to see a roster that doesn't include him, and it's for good reason. He's very beloved, he's a natural fighter, and he's a good candidate for a rushdown type character. In my roster, though, he will be a short stack, or short character, which is an important distinction, and he'll also be a zone breaker. So Stitch is a character that I envision will be very fast and deal lots of rapid attacks, but only doing minimal damage in the process. He'd also use his blasters to help him get in close, to close gaps between the opponents. And his shorter stature would make him dodge attacks even if just standing in place. So basically, he's harder to hit. So the goal with Stitch is basically to just be a character that gets in close. It's not so much rush down, so much as it is closing the distance between you and your opponent. He would be a master of that, I feel. Next up is Snow White. It's pretty obvious to see why I would include her. She was the lead of the first theatrically released Disney film, like feature length that is, and she was the first Disney princess. Plus, I mean, it's Snow White. She's an iconic character. Her film is iconic. It just makes sense. I envisioned some of her attacks would involve her singing, maybe bringing out some of the dwarves to help her out for certain attacks. But most of her attacks, I imagine, would involve calling upon other Disney animal characters, because that is one of Snow White's signature things, is using her singing to, you know, call upon animals. So I think it'd be cool if she'd used it to call upon other Disney animal characters that didn't end up making the roster. As a result, this makes her a turtle and summon type character. She would stay away from the opponent and dish out other Disney characters to fight in her place, basically. This is where I envision characters like Nemo, Dory, Mufasa, Simba, Scar, characters like that are like, yeah, they could be fighters, but they are a lot more animal-esque than some of the more humanoid ones, so it might make more sense for them to be placed elsewhere. And this is where I want to utilize them, because I think Snow White being a fighter makes a lot of sense, and I think this would be a cool way to utilize her strengths without deviating from her character. Wreck-It Ralph was one of the most beloved modern Disney films, and one of the most beloved characters from it was Vanellope von Schweetz. So I envision that she would be a hit-and-run type character. A couple of attacks I would want to involve her like go-kart in some way, which, I don't know, maybe you use it like a Wario bike and she just kind of brings it out and can drive it for a bit and not dealing a lot of damage. Hard to say. Or you could just implement it into some of her attacks, just have it appear, disappear, that type of thing. I also think it'd be neat if she used like the metal from Hero's Duty for a couple of attacks, maybe like aerials or something. But most of her attacks, I would want to involve her glitching to deal small damage by getting in close and then get away over and over again to stay out of harm's way. One of my friends suggested to me that maybe for this ability, she actually like takes damage if she uses it more frequently in like rapid succession, because something like this glitching effect would definitely be You know, it'd have to be very evasive, and so you don't want players to abuse that. So you don't put it on a cooldown, but you do make it so where the more you use it in rapid succession, the more damage you're going to take. And I think that also plays well into her character. Next up is one of the most iconic and beloved Disney characters in a long time, I want to say, which is Elsa from Frozen. So, besides the obvious status as a character, she's a natural fighter as well. She will be our zoner character. She would obviously mainly use her ice powers to keep opponents away from a distance, using icicles, snow, snowballs, flurries, you know, maybe like frozen puddles or something that the opponent could slip on. You know, there's definitely options you have. Maybe even bring in Olaf as part of her moveset to dish out a little bit of damage. Or like maybe she's able to create like Olaf copies or something that just kind of stay in place and help keep the opponent off of her. Kind of like Sub-Zero's clone things, but like it doesn't freeze the opponent if they touch it. Although, that's not a bad idea either. Zootopia is a very popular Disney film, and I think Judy is a very liked character from it. She would also make for a really good fighter, I feel. She seems like a natural choice for it, and so her archetype would be a footsies archetype, which essentially means that she would have an assortment of kicks that she could utilize very effectively by staying in close and outspeeding most other attacks. So Judy's goal would be to get in, do a lot of damage, and basically out-prioritize the opponent as far as what moves are being thrown out. And of course, her drawback would be that she really struggles at a distance. I envision she probably wouldn't have a projectile, really, unless you want to give her like a carrot to throw or something. But I imagine for the most part, she would be strictly an up-close fighter, which would make it really difficult for her to fight characters who excel from a distance. Beast is one of the main characters of what's often considered one of the best Disney films ever made. So combine that with the fact that he seems like a naturally fit fighter, and it only makes sense you'd include Beast here. I envision his archetype would be that of a grappler. I think he would use his big size and big arms to get a hold of opponents and really dish out damage to them by tossing them or clawing at them or that kind of thing. And I'm sure he's also going to be, you know, not super sluggish either. So he'd be able to close distances just fine. He'd be able to take a hit. Like, he would make for a very good grappler, I feel. One of the most iconic Disney villains ever, Maleficent, is definitely a fan favorite among the already infamous Disney villains catalog, I guess you could say. And even more so thanks to her live-action movies, which I'm going to be taking partial inspiration from here because she has new skills there that I think would be cool to implement here. I envision her archetype as being a mix-up character. I feel like she would use her wings for a lot of attacks. Her crow ally, I think, is named... oh gosh, what is that? I don't remember her crow's name. He has a name. I don't remember his name, but she has one. I imagine he would be utilized for like far-reaching attacks, and her wings would be up close. And so she'd have strong close-range stuff, strong distance stuff, but struggling somewhere in like that middle area. And that's why I think she would make for a good mix-up character, is because she could fight up close very well, or she can fight from a distance very well. I'm sure she'd like utilize her like staff and stuff to maybe a big final attack where she like turns into her dragon form or something. Little Mermaid's pretty relevant recently, and so is Ursula, another one of the most iconic Disney villains ever. I wanted to make sure I had quite a few of them in this roster, so Ursula seemed like a good pick. I envision her archetype would be a zoning trapper. She could utilize her singing for some attacks, or I guess Ariel's singing for some attacks. And I envision most of her attacks would involve far-reaching tentacle strikes, or her eels carefully placed around the stage, maybe causing like passive shock damage if you touch them. So as a result, I feel like she would want to have like a bunch of control over the stage. Because if I haven't already said before, this is a platform fighter, but yeah, the idea would be that Ursula would like use her tentacles to make it difficult for the opponent to stay on the ground, and the eels would also contribute to that. Captain Hook is a very beloved Disney villain, but a little less serious than the other two. I would envision he would be a rushdown swordy type character, so he'd utilize his hooks for harder hitting attacks, but most of the time would utilize his sword to do fast and good damage. You know, he's just an up close and in your face swordy, more than anything. Maybe some of his attacks could involve like Smee or maybe even TikTok Croc. Hard to say, but that's how I feel Captain Hook would play, and I think it makes a lot of sense for him. Maybe you have like attacks that involve like cannonballs or something. Maybe that's how Smee factors into it. And with that, we have our starting roster of characters. This would be like if you're opening up the game for the first time, booting it up the first time, this is the roster you're greeted with. The rest of the cast you're going to see from this point on would be what is considered the unlockable characters. So let's go ahead and get into the first one. Winnie the Pooh is a very beloved series, but I have to be honest, I didn't feel right putting Pooh in a fighting game. It's not a matter of he can't fight, it's a matter of I can't imagine anyone wanting to fight Winnie the Pooh. So I decided to go with Tigger instead. I envisioned he would be a rushed-round pressurer. He would be fast and in your face at all times, dishing out a lot of hits in a brief period of time, albeit they wouldn't be very strong, definitely with like his paws, feet, and especially his tail. And I also think he would have very good jump height. So maybe he would be a good aerial fighter, simply because he's got like a lot of good, presumably air mobility and jump speed and jump height. Mulan is a very cherished Disney princess film, and so it makes perfect sense for her to be included as a fighter. That and the fact that, you know, she's a literal fighter. Like, of all the characters, this is like one of the few you kind of have to include no matter what. I envision Mulan would be a mid-range swordy. She would like to stay a set distance away from her opponents, mainly using her sword. A couple of moves may use her staff that you'd see in, like, Make a Man Out of You. And I imagine some of her special moves could also utilize Mushu, or potentially even, like, some fireworks. I believe that's something Mulan is also kind of known for, so that could be really cool for her character. So yeah, of all the characters, Darkwing Duck is probably the one I'm stretching the most on claiming isn't specifically Disney Channel character. That is where he originated, but he is getting his own movie, presumably a Disney Plus exclusive one, or a in-theaters one, I don't know. Regardless, he is getting his own movie, which I think puts him at least at a different level of status than a lot of other Disney Channel characters. That combined with the fact that he comes from the Mickey Mouse universe, I think it makes a lot of sense to include him regardless. So Darkwing Duck, after all these other characters, is going to be our first true, proper, all-rounder character. He'd be well-versed in typical martial art combat, but he's also got a slew of gadgets to pull from to work well at long distances too. There's really not much to go over here. If you've seen Darkwing Duck, you know what he's capable of, and you'd know that he is a perfect fit for this game. So, Raya isn't one of the most favored Disney films, but regardless of the film status, it doesn't change the fact that Raya herself makes for a very easy fighter, right up there with Mulan, especially because of her really unique sword. As a result, I imagine she'd be a zoner sortie, which is a little different. Her sword being able to detach and reattach is very unique for her character. She would have some moves probably similar to Byleth from Smash, but should have more emphasis on reaching far rather than the little set distance Byleth got. I also think she would want to ensure she's using it to keep opponents away from her. Of course, have, quite a bit of fighting options should an opponent get close, but I also think it'd be cool if she was able to reach pretty far as well. Princess and the Frog has definitely become a cult classic among Disney films for the past 5-10-ish years now, I want to say. But no character from it has become more iconic than Dr. Facilier, who is my next pick. I envision that he would be a puppet character. Some of his moves could involve his staff or potentially some of dance moves. He'd have a lot of card projectiles you could use to switch around, deal different properties while using. But I think most of his moves should come from shadows, because throughout the whole film, it's like he's always using the shadows or his own shadow because they act independently of him. So I think it'd be cool if you played that into that for his moveset. And so I feel like most of his attacks would probably be more the shadows doing the work than him. He would still have attacks, but I feel like most of the general attacks should be part of the shadows. Emperor's New Groove is definitely an even bigger cult classic than The Princess and the Frog, and KRONK is definitely the standout character from it. I would imagine he would be an unorthodox mix-up type character. I think he would hit hard and have a lot of survivability, not particularly fast, but would have good close-up attacks, such as maybe swinging around hostage bags or potentially dropping a chandelier on an opponent. I also think he would have a lot of far-reaching attacks as well, though, like sending a roller coaster at an opponent, or lassoing with a jump rope to bring opponents in or send them further away. Yeah, I mean, it's KRONK. People love KRONK. Of course you want to see him in a fighting game. Moana has been a modern hit, and it's very safe to say that I should include a fighter from it. Moana would be a good choice, but I'm personally going to go with Maui here. I think he's got a lot of potential with the way he's got his hook. It's a very unique weapon on its own, but he's also got the whole shape-shifting into different animals thing. As a result, I think he would be a good all-rounder character. He can shapeshift into just about any animal, which makes him equipped for just about anything. His ground attacks would definitely evolve his hook and other smaller animal forms. I imagine he'd want to put his opponents into the air, though, so maybe a lot of his attacks would want to put the opponent into the air so that he could utilize moves involving his hawk, which definitely seems to be his favorite animal form. Encanto is definitely a modern favorite of mine personally, but Mirabelle, as much as I like her, isn't really my pick here. I think, they make a whole point throughout the whole movie that, oh, she's special even though she doesn't have a gift. And, that's true in the context of, a film in the real world, but when it comes to a fighting game, I want someone with a little more pizzazz. And so that's where Isabela comes in. Not just because her moveset would be flashier, but it'd also just be a lot more unique and interesting. I envision her as two archetypes simultaneously. She would be a glass cannon, but I also think she would do a lot of stage control. So her moves would definitely utilize planting either walls or bursts of flowers to deal damage and block off opponents, or maybe plants like cactus and such being constant hurdles to get around, because if you touch them, you'd like get poked and take damage, maybe get knocked back a bit. I imagine a lot of her attacks would hit very hard, and she would put a focus on making it treacherous to get across the stage to her. But I also think she'd have quite a few evasive options as well. But in the end, she would be very vulnerable should an opponent get close on her. But again, you know, the point of her character is that she's supposed to keep the opponents at bay, which she would be capable of. Alice in Wonderland is a very weird but very beloved film. It's a pretty old one too, actually, now that I think about it. But one of the most remembered characters from it is definitely Cheshire Cat. So I would describe the archetype I came up with for him as nothing short of unorthodox. Not unorthodox zoner or all-rounder, just unorthodox. So here's what I'm thinking. I think Cheshire would function completely differently from any other fighter. He would be on a health bar rather than percentage and take significantly less knockback from moves. When his health runs out, he would lose a stock or life or whatever. His attacks would do minimal damage, but have greatly increased knockback. His down special, I envision, would have him consume the eat this and drink this thing, like the little food and the little vial of liquid from Alice in Wonderland. I envision he would consume those at the same time for his down special, and when he does, his properties would become reversed. So instead, he would now do minimal knockback, but significantly more damage, but also take significantly more knockback and can still lose stocks if he goes out of bounds. This applies to both modes of him. And I feel like you would be able to switch between these two modes at any point, not really any set limit on them besides the cooldown to actually use them. Yeah, I don't know, Alice in Wonderland is remembered for being such a weird film, and I feel like it's important that the character I go with from that film should be very weird implementation-wise as well. Nightmare Before Christmas. You want to talk about cult followings. This film has seen rise like no other. And the fan base alone has kept this film relevant and got it back in theaters and got it the credit it deserved. It's truly impressive. That being said, Jack Skellington is definitely my pick here. Oogie Boogie was also a good candidate, but in the end I went with Jack. I envision him as being a mid-range glass cannon due to his long limbs, but also seemingly strong nature. He would probably hit very hard and have stun attacks via like scaring or jump scares or like, you know, that type of thing. I also think he'd have very good reach and keep opponents at a distance that he prefers them to be. So not on the other side of the stage, but like an ideal distance where he's hitting them, but they're not hitting him. Even so, though, I also feel like he could be pretty light weight-wise and probably pretty easy to take stocks from early if not careful. Also, Jack Skellington, for those that don't know, was basically, song-wise, very heavily inspired by Danny Elfman. And Danny Elfman was a rock star or part of a rock band prior to Nightmare Before Christmas, and he was starting to feel jaded with it. And he projected a lot of his own thoughts and feelings on the rock music industry and his band and stuff like that onto Jack Skellington, and that's why his characterization is so strong, especially in his songs. The point I'm getting at is I've once again managed to find a way to include the rocker archetype that I love including in these rosters. Oh, Figment. This is definitely a Disney character. So Figment is a Disney mascot character. As far as I'm aware, he's most known for being at like the parks, rather than like Mickey and stuff, which is fine because it's a dragon. Dragons are cool. I love trying to implement a dragon in any roster I can as well. So I imagine Figment would be a bait and punish zoner. It's a dragon, and as such, normally has a lot of tail whipping and fire breathing. But Figment is also very unique in that its main skill set is very bizarre. It can teleport, it can duplicate itself, and it can shapeshift itself. It's got all different kinds of stuff going for it. So as a result, I feel like he would want to encourage opponents to get in range of his attacks that would reach far and wide and be very unpredictable due to his shapeshifting. I think it'd also be cool if he made duplicates of himself to make it hard to tell who's who and be extra evasive via teleportation. Basically, Figment wants to keep you away, but once you get in and leave yourself vulnerable, you're in trouble, because Figment will be able to dish out damage very fast when they're on the attack. And after Figment, we have our final Disney fighting game roster character. Place your bets. Kermit. Yeah, so I did say that I was going to avoid including anything that wasn't purely Disney, but Kermit is an exception for a couple reasons. The first one being, it's Kermit. Everyone loves Kermit. I have not met a single person who doesn't like Kermit, unless they just don't like the Muppets as a whole. Like, if you like the Muppets, you like Kermit. Like, it's just a fact. The second thing is that the Muppets aren't like... They're very ensemble cast-ish already, and as a result, I feel like if I made a roster with that franchise, it would just be very predictable or very safe. There's not a lot of room to experiment with a roster like that. And so thirdly, I wanted to implement Kermit in some way that made him feel special, because the Muppets are a very special part of Disney, even if they don't utilize it as well as they probably should. So, with that being said, Kermit is our final character, and I envision his archetype would be a mix-up trapper. I think he'd utilize his banjo and maybe some rainbows to dish out damage close up. He would, of course, want to whack people with his banjo, maybe play some songs for him. But I think his rainbows, it would also be cool if they covered distance. So, like, from wherever Kermit uses the attack, and a set distance is where like a rainbow will appear, and then maybe it'll have different effects for anyone who gets underneath it. So maybe like opponents walking underneath the rainbow during a set period of time, it'll put them in a sleep state or something like that. I think it'd be cool if he had those kind of abilities. And with that, we have this Disney fighting game roster. This took way longer than I thought it would to really pin down and figure out who I would actually add to this. A lot of tough cuts were made, but in the end, I'm very, very happy with this roster, and I don't think I made any egregious calls as far as the roster goes. Thank you guys so much for watching, though. Let me know down in the comments below what you think of this roster. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos like this. Let me know what future Make the Roster videos you want to see. Share this video with your friends if you think they'll like this. And until the next video, peace.